I returned home late in the evening. The day had been hard, as always, work, school, running around. When I entered the house, I was met by my mother's tense gaze. She was sitting at the table, her fingers clasped together, and my father was standing next to me, his arms crossed over his chest. A heavy, almost tangible silence hung in the room. "We need to talk," my mother said in an even but cold voice. I looked around for my brother. He was sitting on the couch, stretched out with the remote in his hand, and didn't even bother to turn his head in my direction. "What happened?" I asked, internally tense. My father sighed and said, "We decided it was time for you to move out." I blinked, not understanding. "What? Why?" "You're an adult now," my mother said. "We can't support you anymore. Living on your own would be good for you." I felt a surge of indignation in my chest. "Independent? Are you serious? I work. I go to school. I pay the bills. I help around the house. I cook. I clean. And he?" I pointed at my brother, who seemed to be completely ignoring the conversation. "He doesn't do anything." "Why not him?" My mother raised her hand sharply, silencing me. "He's a man," she said in a tone that brooked no argument. "He needs a home, stability. He needs to develop his own life, build a future. And you're a girl. You can do it." My fists clenched. "Do you really think this is fair? You're just kicking me out to make room for him." My father shrugged. "You're strong. You've always been strong. We're sure you can do it." I felt the ground slipping out from under my feet. They didn't even try to hide the fact that my brother was more important to them. I was just an extra detail, unnecessary in this house. My brother finally deigned to look at me, smirking. "It's not the end of the world," he said mockingly. "You always wanted independence, so here you go." I looked at my parents one last time, hoping to see a shadow of doubt in their eyes. But nothing. Just cold determination. They had already decided everything. They didn't need me anymore. I stood in my room, looking at the things that now had to fit into a couple of suitcases. Looking back, I suddenly realized that this place had never really been my home. It was just a space I lived in, not one where I was loved and appreciated. I stuffed clothes into bags, trying not to cry. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing me broken. But inside, I was seething. When I walked out into the hallway, dragging my suitcase behind me, my brother didn't even bother to take his feet off the coffee table. He just looked at me lazily and smirked. "So, are you ready to live on your own? Maybe you'll finally understand how hard it can be." I clenched my teeth, but didn't answer. I knew there was no point in arguing. My parents were standing in the doorway. My mother looked a little tense, but it wasn't because she was afraid for me. It was more because she didn't like this whole uncomfortable moment. My father simply handed me a small envelope. "Here," he said. "For now." I took it, even though I knew I shouldn't count on much. I tore the edge and pulled out a few bills. Only $200. I looked up. "Are you serious? Is this all you can give me after you just throw me out of the house?" My father frowned. "We don't owe you anything. You're an adult. It's time to learn to live on your own." I clenched my fists but said nothing. There was no point in saying anything else. They had made their decision, and I realized one thing. I had never been considered an equal in this family. I stepped over the threshold, and the door slammed behind me. I was alone. The cold night air hit my face, mixed with the bitterness of betrayal. I stood on the porch with suitcases, not knowing where to go. I had no apartment, no plan, only anger and resentment. But I swore to myself, I will return. And when this happens, I will decide who has a place in my life and who does not. I walked along the dark streets of the city, feeling the cold wind creeping under my jacket. The suitcases seemed incredibly heavy, but even heavier was the realization that I no longer had a home. I couldn't afford to panic. I had no right to be weak. The first night was spent in a cheap motel. The room smelled damp, the sheets were washed out, but I had no choice. I spent it without sleep, staring at the ceiling and replaying the evening in my head. The next morning, before the money ran out, I took action. I went around several stores and cafes, leaving a resume. There was little work, the competition was huge, but after a couple of days I managed to get a job as a waitress in a small cafe on the outskirts. The first shifts were hell. From morning until night I ran between tables, serving customers, and at night I could barely move my legs from fatigue. But I needed money. Soon I found another part-time job as a cleaner in an office center. Now my day began at 5 in the morning, when I washed the floors in the corridors of an office building, and in the evening ended in a cafe, where I worked until midnight. It was hard. Sometimes I caught my reflection in the mirror, tired eyes, bruises under them, fingers worn down to calluses. But I could not allow myself to stop. While I worked 16 hours a day, my brother was having fun. I saw his photos on social networks, new cars, trips, restaurants. He lived the life that I was not even offered. And you know what's most interesting? My parents did not even try to find out how I was doing. Not a single call. Not a single message. For them, I ceased to exist the moment I stepped outside their door. But it was even for the best. Because that night, as I fell asleep on the hard mattress of my tiny rented room, I promised myself one thing. I would get my way. I would become stronger. And one day, they would regret doing this to me. I continued to work nonstop, changing one shift after another. I saved every penny, cutting myself down on everything. Pasta and rice became the basis of my diet, and I bought a new sweater only after the old one literally fell apart. But while I was struggling to survive, my brother lived as if he had no worries or consequences. I knew this not because he told me. He certainly did not even think about getting involved with me. But social media. I scrolled through the feed and saw pictures of him. He is on a yacht with a glass of champagne. He is driving a new sports car. He is in a 5-star hotel surrounded by friends. I wanted to laugh. I worked like hell just to pay the rent for a tiny room, and he lived in a house that was rightfully mine. He spent money that could have been my start in life. His parents continued to finance his whims. When I accidentally met an old friend of the family, he said with a smile, "Your brother is just great. His parents are so proud of him. He is a real businessman." A businessman? Is a businessman someone who spends money on expensive toys and parties? I didn't answer, but something was boiling inside me. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and thought, how long will this last? How long will it take before this whole fairy tale ends? Because I knew it couldn't last forever. And when everything collapses, when my brother hits rock bottom, my parents will remember me. But will they be forgiven then? I wasn't sure. But I knew one thing for sure. I will never let them decide my fate again. 7 years. 7 long years during which I transformed from a helpless outcast into a successful, independent woman. It wasn't easy. I worked around the clock, learned on the go, took risks, failed, got up and moved forward again. I lost friends because I didn't have time to hang out. I didn't communicate with my family because I didn't want to hear their excuses again. But it was worth it. Today, I stood in front of the mirror in my own apartment, spacious, stylish, with a view of the city. There was no longer any fear for tomorrow in my life, no more eternally counting the change in my wallet. I built my business from scratch. I no longer needed anyone's help. But the most amazing thing in this story was not that. My brother. He didn't just spend all the money that was handed to him on a silver platter. He destroyed his life. I wasn't specifically following him. He just suddenly popped up in the news. The headlines read, "Debts, lawsuits, and bankruptcy. The son of a famous entrepreneur squandered millions." I looked at his photo. He didn't look the same as he did 7 years ago. His eyes, which once shone with self-satisfaction, were now empty. His clothes no longer looked luxurious, and his smile seemed forced. I closed the phone and took a sip of expensive coffee. The irony of fate. Now my brother found himself in the same position I was in. Only no one supported me then. The question was, would I support them now? I knew the answer. But first, I would let them come to me, because they will definitely do it. I wasn't wrong. It had only been 2 weeks since the article about my brother's bankruptcy when my phone rang. I looked at the screen and felt a strange feeling flare up inside me, a mixture of anticipation, gloating, and calm confidence. Mom. I hadn't heard her voice in years. She never called without reason, never asked how I was doing. So they were desperate. I let the phone ring for a few more seconds, savoring the moment, and then finally answered. "Hello." My voice was even calm. "Dear." My mother's voice was trembling, as if she was trying to find the right words. I was silent. "How are you?" We haven't talked in a long time. I chuckled to myself. We haven't talked in a long time. Or rather, you just never wanted to talk to me. I'm fine, I answered shortly. There was silence. And then, just as I expected, my mother got to the point. You probably heard. We're in trouble. Really? I feigned surprise. Your brother, he made mistakes. We thought he could cope, but he lost all his money. And now we have nothing left. She paused, as if expecting me to immediately start sympathizing and rushing to help. I took my time with my answer. And my mother hesitated. You make good money, right? Are you stable? We have nowhere to live. We were hoping that you. She didn't finish, but I didn't need to hear the rest of that sentence. They wanted me to save them. The same people who threw me out on the street for the sake of the golden boy. Now they came to me with an outstretched hand. I wonder, Mom, I said, not hiding my sarcasm. What did your son tell you? He's the head of the family now, right? He's the one who always got the best, isn't he? The mother sobbed. He left. We don't know where he is. Of course. He was used to getting everything on a silver platter. And when life demanded responsibility from him, he just ran away. I sighed and decided not to give them a final answer for now. I'll think about it, Mom, I said coldly. But I need time. I'll call you back. I hung up and sat in silence. I knew what I would do next. But first, I would let them feel the same way I felt. I didn't call back. A week passed, and then another. Mom called every day, sometimes several times. I didn't pick up. Let them feel what it's like to be ignored. Let them remember me standing on the doorstep, desperately trying to prove that I, too, was worthy of love and support. Let them experience the very helplessness that I felt. One evening, I turned on voicemail. There were dozens of messages. I listened to several. Daughter, please answer. We are desperate. We don't know what to do. Everything has collapsed. We have lost everything. We made a mistake. We were wrong. But family is supposed to help each other. Family? Interesting. I rewound to the last message. My mother had left just a couple of hours ago. Her voice sounded different. Not so pleading, but irritated. If you think we're going to grovel before you forever, you're wrong. We're your parents, and you're obligated to support us. We raised you, fed you, gave you a roof over your head. I chuckled. Oh, really? Do I owe them something now? They weren't asking for forgiveness. They weren't truly sorry. They just wanted me to do for them what they hadn't done for me. I closed my phone and calmly finished my coffee. Let them wait a little longer. This is just the beginning of my game. I didn't answer for another week. Now it wasn't just the intercom that was ringing, but the phone as well. They changed tactics. They started texting. Mom, please forgive us. We realized everything. Dad, we made a mistake, but you won't leave us in trouble, right? And then him. Brother. The first message is short and sarcastic. I hope you're proud of yourself. A day later, another one. You're acting like a mean bitch. And on the third day, he broke. Sister, please. I was wrong. I didn't know how hard it was for you. Give me a chance to fix it. I slowly reread his words. Interesting. Just a month ago, this man looked down on me, and now he's begging. I decided it was time to show them my mercy. But on my terms. I wrote my mother one short message. Come tomorrow. I have an offer for you. And I put my phone on silent. The next day they were standing at my door. They knocked once, twice. I was in no hurry to open it. Let them stand there. Let them feel what it means to wait. Finally, I opened the door. In front of me were 3 people who had once erased me from their lives. They looked different, aged, broken. But did I feel sorry for them? No. I silently stepped aside, letting them in. They sat down on the sofa, waiting for a miracle. But the miracle was that now I had the power. I crossed my arms and said, I will help you. My mother's eyes flashed with hope, but on one condition, and they definitely won't like this condition. The room was deathly silent. They froze in anticipation. What condition? Asked my father, clearly ready to seize any opportunity. I looked straight at him, then at my mother, and then held my gaze on my brother. You will sell everything you have left, and every cent will go to me, not you. They looked at each other, not understanding, the shock in their eyes giving way to indignation. What? My mother clenched her fists. But this is our house. What house? I grinned. You already sold it, and now you live in a rented apartment, which is also not paid for by you. They were silent. You will have to get jobs. All three of you. I will find you vacancies, but I will not pay for you anymore. My father frowned. You can't do this to us. I leaned forward and smiled coldly. You couldn't do this to me. My brother, who had been silent until then, raised his head. There was something new in his eyes. Awareness. Do you want us to go through the same thing you did? I didn't look away. I want you to understand what it means to be nobody. They didn't answer. I stood up. You have a week. If you don't agree, find shelter yourself. Mom burst into tears. Dad pressed his lips together, as if he wanted to say something nasty to me, but he knew that I was their only hope. My brother nodded. Okay. I looked at him in surprise. I'll do it. His voice was serious. Mom turned to him. Do you really want to agree? We have no choice, Mom. He looked at me. She's right. We chose our own fate. I grinned. He finally understood. I didn't linger. They had to make the decision themselves. A week later, my brother called me. We did it, he said tiredly. Did you sell everything? Yes. We transferred the money to you yesterday. I was silent. He hesitated. I got a job. That was unexpected. Where? A delivery service. I nodded, although he didn't see it. Not bad. My father is trying to get a job as a security guard, but no one will hire him. He's too old. And my mother... He chuckled, but there was nothing funny in that laugh. She's trying to be a cleaner, but her arms are weak and she complains all the time. I roll my eyes. That's her problem. Yeah, I get it. He fell silent, and then added, You know, I always thought that life was so simple. That we would always have a house, money, that my parents would sort everything out for me. I didn't answer. I was an idiot, he sighed. Now I understand that. I was silent again. You're probably happy, right? There was no offense or anger in his voice. Only fatigue. I thought about it. I don't know. I shrugged. I think I'm just happy that justice has prevailed. He smiled bitterly. Okay, I have to go. I need to get the orders done. Good luck. Thank you. He paused, and then quietly added, And thank you for not leaving us completely. I hung up. There was no gloating inside me. There was only a sense of closure. They got what they deserved. Now I could move on. Several months passed. I didn't think about my family anymore. They lived their lives, and I lived mine. I sold their house for a good sum, but I didn't touch the money. It was more a symbol of justice than a real need. One day, returning from work, I accidentally met my brother. He was dressed modestly, his hands looked calloused, but for the first time in a long time there was neither arrogance nor complacency in his eyes. Hello, he said uncertainly. I looked at him and nodded. How are you? He asked. Great. He smiled bitterly. You know, he said quietly, I thought you would hate us. I thought about it. And I looked at him and answered honestly. And then I realized that you are no longer important to me. He nodded. Fair enough. We stood in silence. My parents now rent a tiny apartment. My mother works in a store. My father could never find a job. Their choice. I know. I looked at him. And you? He shrugged. Working. Learning to live again. I nodded. That's good. He looked at me, long and hard. You're never coming back, are you? No. He sighed. I understand. We were silent again. Okay, I won't keep you, he said. Take care of yourself. I nodded. You too. He turned and walked away. I didn't stop him. The past was behind us. I didn't look back anymore. I won.